Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Alex White. If I have your attention, please. I'm Director General here at the Institute. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here this afternoon to what I know is going to be a very interesting, absorbing and stimulating event. With the title, The Role of Space as a Source of National Resilience and Prosperity. I'd like to quickly thank our co-organisers, the Embassy of Canada. It's great to see Ambassador King here. You're very welcome, as always. And the Irish Space Association for helping to make this event such a success. We haven't had it yet, but I feel certain that it will be a success. It already has been. So much of our daily lives depend, as we know, on infrastructure in orbit. Satellites in low Earth orbit have radically changed our world, from enabling internet coverage in the most inaccessible of places to aiding navigation and the shipment of goods around the world. The growing opportunities in space also mean a greater degree of societal resilience, or make possible a greater degree of societal resilience. Satellite imagery is allowing us to track changes in our climate, critically, and provide real-time data during natural disasters, speeding up our responses and preserving life in the process. Satellite communications also add additional capacity to global communications during times of crisis, such as a major subsea cable cut, dare I say. Yet these systems are also vulnerable to attack. Position, navigation and timing of PNT systems are essential to the integrity of the global financial system, for example, and outages risk causing widespread disruption around the world. In 2022, we saw these concerns come to fruition as Russia is believed to have opened its full-scale invasion of Ukraine with a number of cyber attacks against communications satellites. So overall, security in space means security here on the ground. And that's why I'm really particularly delighted to welcome our distinguished panel of experts this afternoon, in particular Dr. Norah Patten, who will be the first Irish person in space. I'll hand you over now to our event moderator, Dr. Orla Quinn, former Secretary General of the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, and a most valued member of the Institute's board. Over to you, Orla.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everybody. You're all most welcome, to those of you online and here in the room. I am personally delighted to sponsor this and to be involved with this event, because in my former career, I had the first national space strategy for Ireland. So it's really a pleasure to see and to hear from our distinguished panel today. Little bit of housekeeping rules first. So in the event of an emergency, the exits are shown. So go that way, don't go up into space. I couldn't resist that. The event is being held under the Chatham House rule. So as you know, questions can be and comments can be reported but not attributed to anybody on the panel. So I would ask people to respect that, please. Please do feel free to ask questions. I've spoken to the panelists and we will leave time. So we should have a good discussion. Our guests online, again, please use the Q&A function to put your questions through. And as always, people will identify themselves and their affiliation. So let me start by welcoming our speakers. As Alex said, this event is on opportunities in orbit, and opportunities are immense, the role of space in terms of national resilience and prosperity. Can I particularly thank the Embassy of Canada and the Irish Space Association for supporting this event, and really pleased Ambassador Dennis King with us in the audience, and Patricia Moore from the Irish Space Association, which again was only established in 2023. So a new organisation, but very high in ambition. So good to that. Can I briefly introduce our four panel members? I could spend the whole session, I think, introducing our distinguished panel members. But if I mention Norah first, Norah is an aeronautical engineer and a bioastronautics researcher with the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. You have had so many research interests, so many campaigns, and principal investigator on aerosolization, I knew I wouldn't get that word right, for skin grafts in weightlessness. She received the Guaranteed Irish Special Recognition Award in 2025 and the Washington Ireland Spirit of WIP Award in 2025. She's also an award-winning author and published her children's book called Shooting for the Stars, which won An Post Children's Book of the Year Award. She's an educator. She's part of the Emerging Space Leaders in terms of that grant. And she's had numerous partnerships with various Irish companies and internationally. As I say, Norah, I hope I've touched on most of it, but I could continue, but I want to make sure we get your presentation. Shawna Pandya is the first named female commercial Canadian astronaut. You're very welcome. And she'll be flying to space with the Virgin Galactic Delta class of spacecraft with the IIAS as early as 26. She's also an emergency and aeromedical transport physicist. And she's the director of the IIS Space Medicine Group. And she's also an assistant clinical professor at the Space Medicine at the Advanced Space Life Research Institute. And I know, and you've said earlier, she still practices medicine as well as her space interests. She has also done aquanaut missions, and she was on the 2019 Neptune mission underwater and completed for a total of 11 days, which is scary stuff for somebody who swims. Her work is permanently exhibited at the Ontario Science Centre alongside Dr. Roberta Bonder, who was the first Canadian woman in space in 2022. And she's been named to the Explorers Club, which is the 50 explorers changing the world. So hugely important from the medicine and from the space side. I'm going to briefly then introduce Norah and Shawna are going to present, and then they'll be followed by the panel discussion with our two panelists as well. Kealan is the head of the emergency planning office here in Ireland. He leads the civil military branch of the Department of Defence in terms of the Task Force on Emergency Planning, and you have certainly been a busy person in recent years, I think, Kealan. He holds an MSc in Emergency Management and an MA in Military History and Strategic Studies from Maynooth University. And I know you've worked right across government with local government, the Defence Forces, the Garda Síochána, and right across all of our areas in that office. And then finally, can I introduce Fintan Buckley. Fintan is a techie, I think is fair to say. He has 25 years of experience in various senior technical, VP and senior managerial roles, both on the software and the hardware side. He's working at the moment. He has worked with Trintech Technologies, and again, that whole card and pin chip rollout in UK and Ireland. He's a founding employee in Parthas Technologies in a variety of senior technical roles, and he has particular interests both on the defence side but also on the enterprise side as well. He holds a degree from Trinity College Dublin in computer science. So without further ado, I'm going to ask our two speakers to make their presentation, and you'll speak for about 20-25. I'll give you a nod at 20 if that's okay.
Great.
And then we'll open the floor after that. So
Thank you. Yeah, let's get going. Yeah, great. We're
Thank
okay to just sit here? Is that okay?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you so
perfect.
much. So give me a nod at the back if you can hear me okay. And if I need to speak up, awesome, I got a thumbs up. So, the theme today is resilience. And in my world of extreme environments, which is where I started, I often talk about psychological resilience. And so that is both failure proofing ourselves, creating enough within ourselves to bounce back when we do meet resistance, and then also keeping ourselves and making ourselves stronger to meet new challenges and new conditions. So when we think about resilience, I often look through it that lens. And so our job during this presentation is to give you the pieces of what we do through our work, as well as the context of what it's like to be in space in this current geopolitical climate. And then we'll put the pieces forward, and then we would like you to pick up those pieces and continue the discussion at the end of it. So we're going to start by kind of telling you our hypothesis that this is the best possible time to be involved in space. And that is our hypothesis. Hopefully you'll agree with us by the end of it. So just a little bit more about the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. We are a US-based not-for-profit. We're very, very international. Our mandate is in education and research, but also uplifting historically underrepresented communities, including women and First Nations. So that's why we're very proud to be up here today. So we've represented 500 plus students from 60 countries. In the 10 years we've been an institute, we believe in democratizing science and leading the way through international stewardship. As a subset of the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences, since we've started doing dedicated suborbital research space flights, we have created a new portfolio called the Flight Opportunities Program. And this is the portfolio under which all of our research priorities, collaborations, curriculum, training and qualifications for our future research astronauts, as well as partnerships fall. So because I like being busy, I've stepped up as the executive director of the FOP. So what we do at our institute depends on the day. We have a number of very useful test beds that are analogous in some way to space flight. So we have parabolic flight. Some of you may know this as the vomit comet. So this is when you fly up and down in a plane, and you're not flying any higher than you would on a commercial flight, but it's the trajectory of the aircraft and falling at the same rate as the aircraft that actually gives you 18 to 22 seconds of zero G at a time. And when you stack parabolas, you have the ability to test procedures, protocols, science, and technology. We also have a number of test beds that simulate spacecraft, off-nominal spacecraft launch and landing operations. You can replicate weightlessness by working underwater. So you can see our neutral buoyancy lab there. Then we also work with commercial spacesuits. So all of this have been incredible workhorses for helping us prepare our science and research as we move into spaceflight. And as of 2023, that's where we started. Our current research astronaut corps includes myself, Norah, and of course our first astronaut, Kelly Girardi. And we have accidentally become the world's first all-female research astronautics crew, which feels pretty incredible to say, but it wasn't that we started out wanting to have an all-women crew. It's that we wanted to pick people who are competent, operational, experienced, and dedicated to research and outreach. So this is what we'll be doing in space. Think of the world's highest roller coaster. When we talk about suborbital spaceflight, you go up and down, and during that trajectory of a very focused period of microgravity in which to perform your science. So think of a performance sport where you have to be locked in. You have to know exactly what's happening second by second. In this case, you also need to know your contingencies. So if you get new results in real time that you maybe weren't expecting, you have to think about how that changes your operations for the science payload you're operating. So to make that a little bit more real, this was Kelly's face in November 2023 when she first saw the Earth from above. And when she tells the story, that's her realizing she's not on the same planet as her daughter. So she, as you can tell, she's not bored with the view. But in fact, she was there with a job to do. We had 3 payloads for her to test: 2 biomedical, a continuous glucose monitor, a biomonitoring device, as well as a fluid cell payload. And so I was her medical lead and part of the ground crew and one of the lead scientists on this flight. And all of this actually paved the way for what we will be doing on IISO2, because in our portfolio of the Flight Opportunities Program, we really ascribe to a fly, fix, fly model of science. So that means we're taking the lessons learned from that first mission, and while we're still down selecting the payloads, which you'll hear about a little bit later, we are committed to also building upon some of the science from that first mission and refining both the operations and the science. So for example, with the fluid cell payload, we'll be adding accelerometers and higher resolution cameras. And so when we talk about what we're looking towards with the IISO2 mission, we have additional priority areas in women's health, health technology, neuroscience, and physical sciences. And because we don't want this to be a one-off or a two-off, we really are looking towards creating that sustainable research pipeline of suborbital space flights. And so we're also looking at refining our crew operations. And you'll see that what we also want our future astronauts to bring to the table is experience, dedication, service, integrity, trust, leadership, and also teamwork. So how do we do that? We are very committed to science. We are committed to advancing our own science, but we're very, very collaborative. So we actually went ahead and did something a little bit bold that we wanted to advance in order to bring the rest of the world with us. So between November and February of last year, we launched the world's first global call for suborbital science with an ask for proposals that fit our priority areas and that could justify why they were best done in suborbital spaceflight rather than parabolic or orbital flight. And the response was, if I may make a pun, stellar. It was incredible. So we had 51 submissions representing 5 continents, 11 countries, everyone from NASA to Harvard to MIT to Mayo Clinic, and a lot of Irish representation as well. In fact, it was kind of full circle to be able to meet with the University of Galway and Professor Lokesh Joshi virtually, fly his payloads, and then meet him in person yesterday, which was pretty neat. So where does that leave us going forward from here? We have passed our first phase of down select. So that means we're actually able to test some of these payloads now. So that's what Norah and I were doing at the National Research Council of Canada in Ottawa last month. And here's kind of what it looks like. This was one of the biosuits that we were testing from our Italian partners. This is a biomonitoring device. They asked us to test the range of motion. What better way than to do a backflip in 0G? As you can tell, we're having the worst time of our lives there. The expression says it all. So since we started doing this, we've done 6 training flights as a team, 3 campaigns. And so we've also been able to bring Irish technology and payloads in it. So to tell us about that, I'm going to hand it over to Norah.
Yeah, thanks, Shawna. Hi, everyone. As Shawna mentioned, we had our open call for science, and we had some amazing responses to that, including some Irish payloads. And some of them have been down selected, and we had an opportunity to test and fly a number of Irish payloads just a few weeks ago at our microgravity campaign. So one of them was Sports Impact Technologies. It's a startup from Ireland. They went through the ESA-BIC program. They've had over $500,000 of investment at this stage. Terrestrially, this sensor, which sits behind the ear on the mastoid. Great having a medical doctor here, but it sits behind the ear and it measures head impact. So terrestrially, that's used in the likes of rugby, hockey, field sports, and it gives an indication of what head impact has been felt by that player. But we wanted to test them in the microgravity environment for a number of different reasons. But if you think about space flight, these types of forces haven't been 100% quantified or looked at on an individual level. So that will inform seat design. So if you're in a launcher, which has traditionally been designed one size fits all, how can you ergonomically make that better individually? We also wanted to test, does this sensor actually work in the microgravity environment? So it's a technology demonstration. So you'll see in this next little video, we did fly this. They were delighted with the results. You could actually see the 0G reading on the sensor. So we've been able to fly the sensor twice, and we have great outputs scientifically to come.
I don't think we have the videos loaded.
No worries, that's okay. It was just another microgravity video anyway, so you'll get the sense of it. And then, as Shawna mentioned, Aquila Bioscience. So this is a spin-out of the University of Galway, and Professor Joshi is really just scientifically so smart. They have created this technology for pathogen capture. So this wipe, technology in the form of a wipe, can actually be used on the skin, on the face, on the body for pathogen capture. They've worked with the Defence Forces. They've gotten European Space Agency funding. It's non-toxic. It doesn't off-gas. So if you're thinking of uses for space, it's ideal because you don't get the off-gassing. It's not toxic for human life. So this was a simple experiment where myself and Shawna had the chance to work with Aquila to fly and test their wipe on the microgravity flight to look at the possibility of whether those conditions leave it with structural changes or effectiveness changes in the effectiveness of how the wipe works. So we brought it back to Ireland after we flew it last month. It's gone through testing in some of the labs they have in Galway, and they'll also send it abroad to France to do more harsh, more dangerous pathogen testing on that. And then finally, This is another project that we got to work with the University College Dublin here, UCD, and this was really a follow-on from a project that they're doing called Mars Crop. They're looking at different plants, for example, willow, that can be used for phytoremediation. So if you have very contaminated soil, there's certain plants or trees that can be used to kind of clean up that soil. But I just think this is so aligned with the whole notion of resilience and where Ireland can really lead. So interestingly, I just read the headline of the report that was out yesterday, the annual review and outlook for agriculture, food and the marine 2024-2025. And they've said that Irish agri-food exports achieved a record value of 19 billion. So you might think, well, why would we stress seeds and you know, compare them or have them stressed in this kind of operation? How does it translate to Earth? Because if we're looking at extreme conditions here on Earth, degraded soil, overuse of fertilizers, salt pollution, and then if you look at space agriculture, the extreme conditions is almost, you know, aligned. So what we were able to do for this project is work with the University of Montreal to fly some of these seeds, stress them under these microgravity and hypergravity conditions, and then grow them. And, you know, seed growth in space is nothing new. It's been going on for decades. But I suppose where it aligns is what crops you're growing, for what research outcomes are you looking for. So as we enter this whole world of changing environments, you know, our global ecosystem is heating up, the extreme temperatures, it's not necessarily going to be the best yield of crop that are going to be the most ones in use. It's going to be those crops that are able to survive. So that's really where we can use the space environment to stress certain seeds and then have the opportunity to test them on Earth to align, I suppose, with that. We can lead in this space agriculture field. And then I'll pass it back to Shawna for more space medicine.
Yeah, so what we're getting at is that maybe sometimes when we solve for problems in space, they can also bring benefit back to Earth. And oftentimes we get asked, you know, well, what has space done for me lately? And so space medicine, as you've heard, is my background. So we're just going to quickly go through some of the videos and the testing we've done in neuroscience, health tech, and women health. So pupillometry is used in aeromedical transport. And so that's just a way of gauging brain pressure very quickly. You're looking at the rate of which your pupil expands and contracts. If it's sluggish, that may indicate head trauma. And so we use that in space flight because we do see changes in pressure on the optic nerve in space flight. So we did some initial work with a handheld pupillometer. This is a smartphone-based AI pupillometer that I'm using on my teammate Kelly. The mixed reality point of care ultrasound that you see that I'm holding there was funded by the Canadian Space Agency's Deep Space Healthcare Challenge. And the whole idea was they wanted to invest in health tech that could both help keep astronauts healthy in space, but also could increase local capacity in rural and remote communities. So we didn't necessarily have to medevac patients, but can keep them in the community. And so the point of this ultrasound, which is a workhorse in any emergency department, as well as up on station, is that you're creating a display that you can see through your mixed reality headset. So the ergonomics are better, but you can also link in a remote expert who can see what you see and help you troubleshoot with image acquisition. So we've tested that in 0G as well. And then we've also done some just-in-time training with women's health. So we were the first team in the world to demonstrate the feasibility of IUD insertion in microgravity, because that has implications for a long-duration mission to Mars. But when you talk about just-in-time training for those with no medical background, that you can also talk about increasing capabilities in rural and remote communities. So speaking of translation, I know at lunch we were talking about remote and rural communities on Earth, and someone asked me what's the most north I've been. So Svalbard, I've been on an expedition up there, and I also happened to bring my mixed reality point of care ultrasound. So we're practicing deploying these technologies in communities where we might test them on Earth. I'm also an aquanaut, as you've heard in my bio. So this is us testing that same technology underwater with one of my crewmates who was a good sport. And then you can see the Canadian Space Agency astronaut, David Saint-Jacques, up there in the middle, being remotely guided. He's in Montreal, Canada, and he's being guided by a remote expert in Saskatoon, Canada, thousands of kilometers away to get a trauma scan of a simulated trauma patient. So one final case study is, this is, I work with a Canadian company called Luxonic Technologies that uses virtual reality to bring healthcare to providers and populations on Earth and in space. And they were funded by the Canadian Space Agency to create medical VR procedural modules to help astronauts maintain their muscle memory and skills in space. Then the pandemic came and everyone lost access to their historical, traditional physical training and workspaces. So the demand for VR went up. And so during this period, we worked with regulatory bodies like the College of Paramedics to train and certify paramedics in skill sets such as airway management, sepsis, and advanced cardiac life support. So as we talk about what is out there in the wide world and the horizon of space exploration, innovation, research, and development, I also want to point out that we're in a gold rush era of manufacturing in space, both in off-world biomanufacturing as well as manufacturing in general. So, we are seeing implications for producing in zero-G that have benefits for pharmaceutical management, stem cell and regenerative medicine, tissue engineering, semiconductors, and fiber optics. There is a new gold rush happening right now, and the world is starting to pay attention. So this is hot off the press. The entire Canada is definitely paying attention to the benefits of space and also through partnerships. So yesterday, Canada announced that it's going to 10x its investment as a partner into the European Space Agency. Historically, we've been contributing 50 million a year. We are now going to be contributing 500 plus million over the next 3 to 5 years to enhance our partnership with the European Space Agency with specific priority areas of Earth observation, telecoms, global positioning and navigation, space situation awareness, as well as space exploration. So, it's interesting to see that we're in this era where the pieces and the opportunities are there, but it's up to us to leap onto them. So, this is a direct quote from the Minister Joly, who announced this at our Space Canada industry event. And basically, I want to highlight where she says, in increasingly complex worlds, the Canadian space sector is critical to Canada, not just for safety and security, but also for economic development and jobs. And so there is far-reaching impacts when we choose to invest mindfully in space. And so it's not just the government who's paying attention. In the past 18 months, I've been increasingly busy, which is a good problem to have. So the space life sciences and space health market is taking off literally. So we're seeing brand new accelerators crop up the world over. Space H is an accelerator put together and backed by Starburst Aerospace, NASA, as well as Microsoft. Boryung, the pharmaceutical company in South Korea, has launched a dedicated human in space initiative. They've invested 60 million in Axiom, the commercial spaceflight company. Seraphim Capital, the UK-based VC, has a dedicated life sciences and microgravity portfolio. And I've been recruited to join the space stream at the Creative Destruction Lab, a zero equity incubator to help startups, and specifically for my expertise in space health and life sciences. So the world is accelerating, whether we want to pay attention or not. The current projections from the World Economic Forum are that space will reach the current space global economy, which is about 500 billion plus, will triple over the next 10 years to reach 1.8 trillion. And so that also has implications for the Irish space ecosystem. And where are we headed with the world? So this is kind of a map of who has a space agency, what capabilities they have, and what they don't. So there is some green, there's some white, there's some blue in here. I'm not going to say who is white and who isn't, but think of it as an opportunity with the puzzle pieces we're laying out in front of you today. So the last thing before I turn it over to Norah to bring us home and talk about the Irish space ecosystem and opportunities there is also being critical and mindful of how we choose to invest in space. So despite being overseas, Canada has been really busy in my absence. So we heard about the $500 million investment into the European Space Agency, but this is the Royal Bank of Canada, one of the biggest banks in Canada. And they just released an executive summary put together by the former chief economist of NASA, who's also a Canadian, talking about the opportunities and where we're also failing. Of the top 10 space OECD countries, Canada is lowest on that list for space investment. Our space investment has fallen for where it should be on par to our GDP over the past 11 years. So as much as we're doing, there are more opportunities. And then coming back to our theme of resilience, the reason and the rationale why is for commercialization, technological development, climate protection, safety, sovereignty, and defense. So there's some pieces out there, and we're going to put a few more before you. So I'm going to turn it over to Norah now to talk about where we are in Ireland.
Thanks a million, Shawna. Perfect. I'll go quick. Yeah, I'm sure many of you in the room have probably seen these slides over the years, but I just think they're very visually impactful when we look at the space industry landscape in Ireland in 2010. These are from Enterprise Ireland. And we fast forward to 2023, and what does that landscape look like now? And this is really just to build on Shawna's message of where we're at and where we're going. Space as an ecosystem is changing rapidly in terms of commercial access, opportunities, growth. And I show this slide in particular, you can see 107 companies listed. Our space strategy, as was mentioned to the intro, was launched in 2019. It runs to 2025. And in the strategy, it lists out one of the metrics, I suppose, one of the wants of setting out the strategy was to support 100 companies to engage with the European Space Agency. But that 100 companies was surpassed as of the end of 2023. So I feel like, you know, we talk about national resilience. Let's be big, bold, and ambitious with our 2025 onward strategy, because there's a world of opportunity out there. Very briefly, just to give an overview, Shawna mentioned Canada and it really ramping up its investment in ESA because of the return it brings nationally to companies and institutes, you know, on many different levels. Where does Ireland sit? We're about half of 1%, so we're still very small. And I just wanted to highlight I suppose the role from a commercial sense of our involvement in ESA. I've done some work with Railtra. They're a space technology company based out by the airport in Dublin, makes spaceflight hardware. And this has been, our involvement in ESA has been fundamental in terms of the product development. And that has then led, you know, you can collaborate and participate in many of the ESA calls to develop technology. And then what can happen is you can spin that into a commercial product. So you can get commercial contracts with launcher companies from around Europe. And it's not just the money that we're getting from ESA, it's that expertise of collaborating with ESA, with European companies, you know, with companies who have other expertise that you can merge together. So I've seen this in full action during my time at Railtra. And also just to highlight, when they were developing the video telemetry system for launch on the Ariane 5 with James Webb, that multi-billion-dollar beautiful telescope that you did not want anything to interfere with. The Irish ecosystem came together because it was COVID, travel was impacted, but they came together to form a kind of a consortium of test partners. So now in Ireland, on the island of Ireland, we can certify and qualify technology and systems that will qualify for Ariane launches. And that's, I would say, it feeds into our national ecosystem and our resilience as we go forward. And really just to bring it home in terms of the next generation, again, you know, when you think about resilience, it's the full cycle. We're not going to have a space industry in Ireland if we don't have qualified graduates coming out with experience and expertise in these different systems, everything from data analytics, hardware, physics, chemistry, like the whole range. And I think AirSat-1 is just such a great example of the impact. Ireland's for Satellite, it was done through the European Space Agency Fly Your Satellite program, an educational program, a lot of Irish involvement on that. But when you think about the 50-odd students who have benefited from working on AirSat, they're getting everything from system design experience, spaceflight hardware, testing, certification, mission design. And many of those have gone into the ecosystem in Ireland. I've worked with them at Railtra. So it's that full cycle. How can we continue to have more AirSats, to have more programs, to qualify people to come out with more experience. And I show this and I think, you know, Ireland was one of the last countries in Europe to have a satellite. But through my flight with IIES, we can be one of the first countries in Europe to have a female astronaut. That's really powerful. And I want to, you know, thank the Canadian Embassy for putting on this week-long opportunity to engage with government ministers. And I just think there's massive opportunities there. And as Shawna said, where do we want to sit in it?
So we started with a hypothesis, and hopefully we've convinced you that not only is this the best possible time to be involved in space, but for those who are willing, there is a universe full of opportunities to chase out there. Thank you very much.
That's brilliant, I have to say. Shawna and Norah, I think you've given us a whole overview where I think sometimes people think of space, so just to put something more contained, but you've really laid out all of the possibilities. We're going to have our two respondents that will respond to the presentation, and then I'll open up the floor. So Kealan, you're head of the Office of Emergency Planning, so I'm sure you have a very particular interest in this. So I'll hand over to you first.
Thank you, and thank you for the invite to be on the panel. But how on earth did you follow that? I mean, that was fantastic. So thank you very much. So my name is Kealan McMoreland, and I head up the Office of Emergency Planning, which is a civil military branch of the Department of Defence. And our key roles and responsibility is to coordinate emergency planning arrangements across government. And we have two key areas that are relevant here, which is one is the National Risk Assessment, and the second one is the Critical Entities Resilience Regulations. And why that is, that's the critical infrastructure protection, and space is a sector, one of 11 sectors that are called out in that directive that came from Europe. And today I'll use the word resilience quite frequently. And one of the key first things in emergency planning is that we define a common language and we have a common understanding. So what do we mean by resilience? And I think it was very helpful in your opening to identify what you see as resilience. But in legislation now, in regulation in Ireland, resilience is to the ability to prevent, protect against, respond to, mitigate, absorb and recover from any incident. And the space sector, while offering opportunities, also poses some risks to Irish resilience. So we have both the opportunities and the risk side, which is important to note. But I want to begin on the positive side and what the positive elements of the space sector has brought to Ireland and Irish resilience. In various sectors such as Earth observation for land use planning and agriculture, maritime navigation and situational awareness, which you're going to hear about a little bit later on, maritime telecommunications, power energy systems, search and rescue, weather monitoring, intelligent transportation systems, and even the financial markets. Space has proven to be invaluable to the coordination and the evolution of these sectors. And it's important that we realise that. And one of the key, and I just because emergency planning and we're after Storm Éowyn and we had some flooding last week, it's important to recognise how space played a part in that emergency response role. And the EU have a system called Copernicus, the Copernicus Emergency Management System, which is activated by our colleagues in the Department of Housing. And this service has been vital to providing rapid satellite-based mapping for flooding and damage assessment on several occasions in Ireland. And the first time that we used it was in 2015 and 2016 during the Shannon Callows flooding. And then we used it in just Storm Éowyn, and we've just recently used it again in Storm Claudia, where we saw some flooding in the Midlands and East. So it's become an invaluable tool, not just for the response, but also in the recovery phase. We look at that satellite data and it becomes an invaluable asset to refine the models that are used to predict flooding. I also want to mention the evolution of space and how the space industry is contributing to emergency planning and societal resilience. So the EU Space Agency is working to complement traditional national warning systems with a satellite-based public warning system, using the Galileo constellation of satellites, which is the European version of GPS, the Global Navigation Satellite System. The Galileo Early Warning Service will be capable of transmitting emergency alerts to the public through devices equipped with the Galileo chip. That's an evolution. And the reason why that's important is because in 2021, when we saw flooding in Europe, there was a catastrophic loss of ground-based communications. There was an inability to get public warning messages out to the public in those flooding areas. And Europe invested now in actually using the GNSS satellite constellation to deliver early warning to the public. And this is a really important evolution. Drawing from my own experience then in the use of satellite information to protect the public, I recall how the use of optical and synthetic aperture radar satellite data during a significant flooding event in Malawi in 2015. And what that allowed us to do was to identify bottlenecks in the humanitarian supply chain, particularly where we couldn't get road access into the flood-affected areas to get humanitarian aid to the affected population. But not only that, the imagery allowed us to overlay boreholes on top of the satellite image where we saw the flood extents, and it allowed us to pre-plan for the flushing of those wells so that when the population returned to their communities, they had safe drinking water when they returned. Now that's not something that you can do with drone or airborne sensors because it takes too long to fly. This is immediate. So I think it's very important to mention those positives of space for emergency planning. And reflecting on our recent experience from Storm Éowyn, disruption to our electricity distribution network saw cascading impacts on water and communications infrastructure. So we saw long-term, so communities were without power and communications for a very long period of time. And in recognition of that, Minister Chambers and Minister Higgins, through the Office of the Government Chief Information Officer and with Vodafone Ireland, have launched a new low-latency platform and satellite service to provide resilient emergency communications. Now, this is important as well because this system is going to allow people to roam on 4G and 5G networks, but also on direct-to-device satellite connectivity. And that means that people in remote areas that are affected by severe weather or other types of emergencies that impact our ground-based communications infrastructure still have access to the 999-112 system. So that's an evolution that could not happen without satellite data. And that's a direct result, and I suppose, and I'm here representing the Department of Defence, but I think it's a sign of government's agility to respond to these type of things using space-based assets. So it's very important, and the public-private partnership as well. And while I've set out a couple of benefits of space infrastructure, because we look after the national risk assessment as well, I think it's really important that we identify some of the risks to our resilience. And I suppose in the national risk assessment, one of the high impact, low probability events is space weather. I know we have colleagues here who are very interested in that area. So just to imagine the Carrington event that everybody will be familiar with happened in the mid 1800s. It's a historical reference point for future risk assessment. But what would that look like to our modern critical infrastructure? And that's a message that we have received from our European partners, from the OECD High Level Risk Forum. They talk about this all of the time, and our job in the Office of Emergency Planning is to actually communicate that across government, and we are taking note. And then just to follow up, this isn't our only vulnerability in space, and we need to be aware of that. So space also has become a recognized domain of warfare, which is a scary prospect. So in today's evolving geopolitical climate, space-based systems may be disrupted by both electronic and kinetic means. So it's not just that natural phenomenon, but now our space-based systems are actually increasingly vulnerable. So in conclusion, as we navigate these complex challenges, understanding both the opportunities and risks presented by the space sector will be essential for bolstering Ireland's future resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Kealan. That gives us again a different view and really, really helpful for the discussion. Fintan, you're CEO of Aeronautics, so you use this and you have the dual use and you've all of those elements. So let me give you the floor to.
Yeah, it's almost like Kealan has set the stage for me. Thank you. I'm the CEO of Aeronautical Technologies. We're a space company based here in Dublin with facilities in the Netherlands and Spain and in Tunisia. We are an AI company. It's where our heritage is in developing ground-based AI solutions. And over the last 8 years, we have pioneered the deployment of AI solutions on board Earth observation cameras, essentially turning these dumb cameras into intelligent, autonomous cameras that can be used in dynamic situations to understand what's going on in the Earth. In 2022, we commissioned our own satellite payload, which was launched early in 2024 to prove out some of the concepts that we are now productizing. Two key achievements over the last year. One is the ability to image an area of interest on Earth and analyze that on satellite and deliver those insights to ground in 10 minutes. That is a groundbreaker in terms of using these satellites in situations that are continuously evolving. The other thing, earlier this year, in combination with JPL and NASA, we, for the first time, demonstrated the ability of the satellites to actually autonomously decide what to do, the ability to assess the scene and determine how best to image that scene to get the best value out of the overpass of the satellite. It's never been done before in a low orbit satellite. So we are now commercializing this technology, very much focused on the area of maritime domain awareness, which is an evolving situation here in Europe in particular, where we are now realizing the vulnerability of our infrastructure, both on water and below water. With our partners, we're developing what we're calling Live Earth Intelligence, which is taking dynamic information from satellites on sea and below sea infrastructure, and using this to generate a true situation or a true view of what is going on in a maritime area, maritime situation awareness. And from that, making an assessment of the threat vectors that are both in an area of interest and that are approaching an area of interest. And this is to assist the maritime services to figure out how best to deploy their resources to mitigate against the threats that they are seeing. We're doing this by establishing a virtual constellation of satellites on orbit, but also sensors, both, as I said, on the water and underwater, and to be able to task these sensors to image the areas that are of most interest from the assessment of the current situation, and then dynamically updating what is going on in the area of interest. There's no way you can do that at the moment without bringing satellites to bear, because there's no other way you can actually see what is going on in a maritime area, in the sea area, without this capability. Our initial target is supporting the defense of the infrastructure, undersea cables, undersea gas lines, etc., and wind farms on the sea, but also expanding out into supporting customs services and drug interdiction, people trafficking, and whatever. I close my opening remark by saying we couldn't do this without the supports that we get here in Ireland. And sometimes it feels like we butt heads, particularly with the policymakers, but actually the supports that we get from both Enterprise Ireland and the relevant departments in doing what we do in a small company like Ireland, making our presence felt throughout Europe and throughout the world. We could not do that without the backing and support, both financially and in advice and whatever, without this support. So, thank you.
Many thanks, Fintan. I think that sets out, we've heard hugely positive opportunities, but also risks and challenges. I mean, unfortunately, life is like that, and we never ever manage to have that simplicity of view. So it is time to open the discussion. I'm going to ask 2 questions just to start off, and then if those of you who wish to take part, please get your questions ready. I suppose the first one, and I'm struck with all of you, in fact, spoke about cooperation, and that this is at international and at national level. I was struck even when you mentioned or the AirSat one, that was 4 government departments, there were so many universities, it was industry sector. It was a fabulous example of where that cooperation can be. So, and obviously both of you working at an international level. So how can we grow that cooperation, or are there particular things that we should be focusing on to really build more of that positive cooperation?
Well, I might start by just saying, like, this week in particular has been so beneficial. We've engaged with, we were in Leinster House on Tuesday. We've engaged with Enterprise Ireland. We'll be meeting Research Ireland tomorrow. And I think who knows where those conversations and discussions will lead. So I think, Shawna's overview of space medicine and where that impacts life on Earth in terms of remote locations in Canada. There's absolutely areas that we can take what has been done in countries like Canada and apply it in a similar setting. And also, like we've spoken a lot this week about the investment in many different areas of space. And Ireland is such a, ecosystem of technology and innovation, creativity. Shawna often references, farthest space industries getting its 187 million Series C funding to develop new pharmaceuticals off this planet. And you look at the pharma industry in Ireland then, over 90 companies, 50,000 plus jobs. There's loads of different ways we can kind of look at the ecosystem here and look at ways that we can use space to advance it. And so I think a lot of that starts with having the conversations, having the dialogue, putting forward, as Shawna does so well, the opportunities in Canada, where it fits in, and then where we sit in Ireland and how we can maybe come together.
Okay. And that kind of brings me to my second question. And Shawna, I was struck when you were talking about women's health, because obviously there are very specific areas of women's health that can impact, and it's not always looked at as a separate topic. So 2 questions. One, I just wanted to ask you in terms of future direction for that women's health piece. And then more broadly, how do we get more young girls and more women into STEM and into space? I'm a great believer in if you can see it, you can be it. And you two are glowing examples of that, obviously, but how do we get to do more?
Sure, yeah. And so absolutely, to pick up where you left off, if you can see it, you can be it. And my own inspiration started with watching Canada's first female astronaut, Dr. Roberta Bondar, going to space and saying, oh, we can do that. Canadian women can do that. And then, just saying, okay, well, she set the path. So it's neuroscientist, physician, astronaut. Apparently that's what you do. And so from a young age, that kind of set the stage. And look, we're making steps, we're making baby steps. And I think we need to catalyze the number of women that we're bringing into technical aspects of space. Because when you look at the data around the percentage of women who make up space explorers, currently it's 14%. And that sounds abysmally low, but that's actually a win.
That sounds better to me than I expected.
Yeah, because when Norah and I were assigned to our flight, it was 11 to 12%. Okay, so we are making small steps. And so we need to accelerate that. And then we also need to say, how can we accelerate that in different ways? And so looking at women of color, people of color, they only make up 1% of all of space explorers. And so then that also takes us into the why it's important. Why should we diversify who we're sending to space? And I think that comes back to your first question,
Yes.
Of like, how and why do we send more people to space? It's the same reason that we might look at the Earth and observe it with infrared, visual, and hyperspectral imaging, because when we look at a problem through a specific filter, we get very different levels of information. And so when we bring different people with different life perspectives and experiences to the table, they're going to approach a problem through different problem-solving mindsets. So it's actually a superpower to be able to solve problems from different perspectives. So then coming to your question about women's health and what the challenges are going forward. So women's health isn't just understudied in space, it's understudied on Earth as well. And so it's easy to think, it's just reproductive health, it's just menstrual health, but truly it's a compendium of bone density health, osteoporosis, cardiovascular health, vaginal microbiome. So we've started doing some of this stuff in the microgravity environment. We've done work with vaginal microbiome and hormonal changes, but the translational aspect of that is saying, okay, well, what insights are we gleaning from this, and how can that help protect women going forward? So we're starting to do some really interesting work looking at RNA transcriptase expression after exposure to a different gravity environment. And that can also have translational impacts for women fighter pilots, pilots in air forces. So we truly believe in taking the best of what we do in space and bringing it back down to Earth.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that, both of you. Okay, let me see. I have a hand down the back up first and another one here. So let me start down the back. And again, if people could identify themselves and their organizations, please.
Thank you. My name is Kealan Fitzgerald. I'm a senior researcher here at the IIEA and I work on security and defense policy. And I think for much of the maybe last 30 years, space has largely been an avenue for international cooperation. If you think about the cooperation that led to the building of the International Space Station, it's been quite inspiring to see space being used for peace. When if you think about it, most of the 20th century was a place of competition. I'm just wondering on all of your thoughts on the implications of the commercial sector, the policy sector, but also as astronauts, the implications of this more competitive geopolitical environment on cooperation on space. I think about concerns about technology theft and maybe more restrictive policy cooperation, maybe with Russia, or implications for the commercial sector as well. Who you're just interested in all of your thoughts on what this new geopolitical environment means for your daily lives working in space policy. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kealan. I'm going to ask people to be brief, because if everybody gets one of their thoughts, I won't have time to bring other people in.
I just say one thing. The current Secretary of Defense in the US said that the next world war will be in space.
Fairly clear. Thank you, Fintan.
I think just from looking at it from a purely risk environment, the impacts of space technology is in everything that we use, even our mobile phones. The ability to connect to the network is all about the PNT signal that comes from the GNS, the global navigation satellite systems. Right, a competitive geopolitical environment that impacts space will impact every single individual. It's really pervasive.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say on the commercial side, I've seen the benefits of having that commercial access, and in the last 5 years, we've seen this year-on-year double-digit growth in terms of the amount of launches. FAA hit its 1,000th commercial launch just recently, but that I feel the benefit I've seen from the commercial ecosystem, and then who knows how it's going to play out in the next 5 years or so. We'll have to wait and see.
So when commenting on the current geopolitical situation, it's a feature and a bug. And so what I mean by that is, when I woke up to this amazing news of 500 million investment from Canada into the European Space Agency, that was followed by, what about NASA? Historically, you guys have worked together very well with NASA. And in these interesting times of a changing relationship of our historically strongest economic partner suddenly deciding that we need to pay more tariffs, our relationship is quite uncertain. And so literally our former trade minister stood up at an Asia Pacific conference last year and said, Canada needs friends. So it's an opportunity to diversify our relationships. And then there's new players who weren't there previously in space. So now Saudi Arabia, the UAE, India has human spaceflight, and some of these folks are also developing launch capabilities. So we went from the beginning of human spaceflight being a political showdown between the USSR and the Americans to being a cooperative era of exploration with the International Space Station. So Europe, Russia, Japan, USA, Canada. And now when you look at who are all considered partners in the Artemis missions, Russia is notably absent, but UAE is committed to building one of the rovers for follow-on missions. So there are opportunities and threats, and it's important to be mindful of them both.
Okay, thank you for that. Gentleman over here.
Hi, my name's Casey. I'm a physicist at the Problem Solving Association. Actually, Kealan pretty much asked what I was going to ask, which was a great point, I suppose. But I was more so going to focus on the commercial aspect. So maybe this is not so relevant, so you can tell me. But from both a physicist point of view and for the sake of science, but also from an emergency planning point of view, you see a lot of market fluctuations, right? So you saw over the summer, Starlink's was studied as a bargaining chip for Ukrainian negotiations and the likes of that. Do you see? I was going to ask, do you see like potential risks, and therefore, how would you like qualitatively and quantitatively discuss them? If that makes sense. So yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
I'm going to just ask Fintan to comment on that, if that's okay.
Lara, first of all, we have to realize that some of this infrastructure, that it can be turned on and turned off at a whim. So Starlink comes from a private enterprise headquartered in the US. A director from the White House will turn off Starlink, so you lose your communication. GPS is exactly the same. We do have Galileo as a backup, but GPS in terms of the accuracy that we have right now, that can be scaled back, or it can even be switched off. Even in that example alone, think of what it does when everyone's driving around, relying on Google Maps to tell you the best way to navigate, and suddenly you're not getting this information about wherever every other car is on the road. Okay, so we have to think about resilience from a geopolitical point of view. So Europe, and this is what we're seeing with the investment in defense budgets going on in Europe, is Europe has to develop its own capabilities, and with the partners with Canada and whomever else, because realizing that who we thought our friends were are currently not our friends. Now, we hope that will change, but we do need to think as a European body how we develop much more resilience. From a purely Irish perspective, I think we historically we have not considered security and defense as something that we can talk about in a forum like this. In our own company, we've had to take this journey from, we're a space company focused on commercial aspects, to actually realizing that our technology is dual use and we can apply it to for societal good, but working with the defense forces to provide the type of information and vision that they need. We've had to navigate and bring our employees with us, but only in Ireland. And when we talk about cooperation, our colleagues in the Netherlands and our colleagues in Spain, they have a totally different view of what defense looks like. And then our sales director is based in Helsinki, right? He has a totally different view of what security and defense looks like. In fact, he has recently signed up for the Finnish Reserve. So we've had to realize actually that we were the outliers in Ireland in terms of what it means to actually consider becoming much more a security company as a space company. So last thing I would say is, as I said in my opening remarks, the support we get from the organisations here in Ireland, Enterprise Ireland, the Department of Defence, has been fantastic. And throughout my career, and much more than 25 years, the industry supports and the strategy has been fantastic in developing the technology capabilities, the education, and even the startup environment for people that are willing to take chance and start their own companies. But where we're struggling ourselves a little bit is actually getting the kind of support we need to help us to actually develop our product. It's not the money, but it's actually the insights, right? From a security perspective, what makes sense for the technology that we're developing. We're getting that elsewhere, but we would love to be able to do this here as well.
Okay, thanks for that, Fintan. That kind of actually brings us into a question that's here online from Louise Brennan. And Louise asks that we still don't have a national space agency, and does that put the country at a disadvantage when it comes to fully realising space opportunities?
I would say yes.
Norah, do you want to?
I would say we practically have. Right? We practically have. Do we put enough money into it? Probably not. But I think we do have across the departments and elsewhere. We do have enough smart people looking at this and actually strategizing and figuring out where we want to make our investments and where we can contribute. So I think we do.
But I think I was going to say, like, if you take our investment in ESA as an example, it's all managed through Enterprise Ireland. So I think that's where, if we had an agency where there was more joined up planning, I suppose, that would definitely help.
Sometimes, and as former Secretary General, the answer to everything isn't always a new agency. It is actually making sure that people work together.
Yes.
And I do certainly think we have seen a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I suppose ERSA was an example, but whether there needs to be more done. Did you want to come in, Shawna, before I?
Norah said everything I wanted to.
Excellent. Yes, please. Lady here in the front.
Hi, I'm Susan Tracy, CEO of Health Tech Ireland. We're the trade association for all the medical device, digital, surgical companies in Ireland, not for profit. I'm also a board advisor at Women in Technology and Science, so I've followed Norah all the way along. She's a celebrity in our house. So it's just wonderful to see all the pieces coming together and where this is going. And just to say, with the See It, You Can Be It, Norah has done so much work in the background, things that people will never see through COVID, online webinars that's really inspired a whole generation of young women and young kids. So she's an amazing leader, just to say that.
Thank you so much.
I suppose really for me in my Health Tech Ireland role, I'm a biomedical scientist by trade, really interested in the experiments that are going on, because I'm definitely seeing in the last year, and particularly actually around the University of Galway as well, with Derek O'Keefe and some of the guys down there, trying to get medical devices more into space to see the impact. And I think there's the remote care and all of that piece to it, but I think also it's how it impacts medical devices in space. And just kind of bringing it into reality of what it would mean for patients. You know, from the experiments that you've done, do you follow all that to the end? Do you find out what the potential is or the impact? And do you see in the future where I suppose the value of all this can be realized, because there's undoubtedly so much value in it?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to that. So what we saw when we had our global call for science, we essentially flagged proposals as red, orange, or green. So green said, you know, this is something we would be happy to fly, happy to down select further, happy to work with the PIs and the proposers to help advance this technology. Orange was flagged as, well, suborbital may not be the best place for it, either because it's outside of our priority research areas or because it's maybe needs a little bit more development on a different one of our test beds, but we do want to help advance the science or the tech. And then red was maybe just not a good fit for our particular submission. And so where this pertains to your question is, we were testing a few things with our microgravity campaign last month. We were testing the science, but this was our first dedicated flight opportunities campaign with researchers from all around the world. We had collaborators from the UK, South Korea, Italy fly in to help see their payloads to fruition. And it was a great success. And so this to us suggested that aside from our flight, in the context of helping advance tech for space, as well as advance tech and proposals for future space flights, we want to be the ones who help you essentially come to our microgravity school and say, how do I make my payload space worthy? And we have the capabilities to do that. So whether it's us coming in virtually and talking to your partners and saying, okay, I have an idea, does it belong in space? And just an intro microgravity health tech 101, we're happy to do that.
Right, thanks, Shawna. Yes, gentleman down here at the back.
He asked me a hard question.
Neil Bolger, I'm a member of the Irish delegation to the European Space Agency. So just wanted to go back to, it's a comment more than a question, but go back to the point about the space agency. I mean, the ESA is our space agency, as I should say, in the first instance. And of course, it's the support of DETI, you know, directly will fund that investment in space. I guess we wouldn't be unusual in the space agency in terms of not having a space agency of our own. Other small countries wouldn't have space agencies, but they have strong collaborative efforts between different government bodies. So currently our government body is DETI, which is like obviously a industry ministry, you know, different to some other member states who have more of a science ministry and education ministry and research ministries. So I think it's about collaborating with other departments in terms of and channeling it through the ESA route, which currently is through our Department of Enterprise. And I think that's the future. And maybe if there's I know with Robotica, and obviously we have a good relationship also with the Emergency Planning Office, who access the Copernicus services, who we attend the Copernicus committees and have good interaction and good, you know, provide good inputs into how we could improve those services, those emergency services in particular. And there's resilience plays a huge role now currently, which some of our clients are experiencing. So maybe a question is more of a commentary on the collaboration, what you would like
Shawna,
in terms of collaboration.
Really good, yeah.
Yeah, I think I need to pull on that thread, because when we look at whether you should have a space agency or not, you know, at least 70+ nations in the world have a dedicated space agency. And so even if you're an ESA member state, DLR from Germany is the space agency for Germany. The Italians have their own space agency. CNES is the French space agency. Why? Because they also need to ask answer to not just the European interests, but their own national interests. And so why do countries as small as Vietnam and the Philippines and Eritrea and Bahrain, why are they interested in space? Because space can answer national interests. And so to the point that was made earlier about, does it need to be formalized? The answer is, well, collaboration, coordination, all need to happen in tandem. And so there's an argument for formalizing the roles of industry, of science, of government, all within that. And then to take it a step further, what has happened in Canada recently, we've always had the Canadian Space Agency, we've had them since 1989, but more recently we've established a budget line for a national space council to follow the lead from our colleagues in the US and the UK, because a space agency handles civil affairs, but they also need to talk to defense. They need to talk to industry and academia. And so having a national coordinated strategy, so you are figuring out where each dollar goes and you're not necessarily replicating your investment in Earth observation through industry and through defense, for example. And then that way you're actually maximizing the return on your investment by making your investment more efficient. So I think there is an argument to be made for a country that doesn't have a space agency.
And I think, again, it absolutely is fundamental that there is a national coordinating
100%.
agency. And I think certainly that's why we wanted to have a national space strategy, to actually identify all those agencies involved in moving parts and to make sure that they're part of it. Comment here, lady here in the second row.
Hi, I'm Katrina Jackman, Professor at the Diastone Zinc Observatory. So I just wanted to follow up. You mentioned academia there, Shawna, and you mentioned the space strategy. So as I'm sure you're all aware, there was the space strategy for enterprise, which is run until 2025, but now we're also working on a national space strategy for research. And there's been a lot of discussion about the commercial aspects of space, which of course is hugely important, but we shouldn't forget blue skies research as well. And something which is going to be helping you, for example, is something that was discovered in 1843 by Hamilton, which is quaternions, which is this very weird equation, which maybe at the time nobody would have realized the implications of that discovery. And now quaternions are fundamental for orienting objects in three-dimensional space. So we must have ring-fenced investment in blue skies research. You never know where that's going to take us. And even the kind of research into resilience linked to space weather, a lot of that fundamental physics and fundamental space plasmas. And so we need to look at those as well as a cornerstone for keeping us safe in space.
Absolutely. And I don't believe in any national strategy that doesn't include research and talent and skills. So that's really, really important that that is part of it. Can I ask, because we've spoken a lot about collaboration, cooperation, be it at national level, be it at international level. Could you say a word about, and particularly maybe at international level, for countries that don't collaborate or don't want to be collaborative, and just the implications of that? And maybe that's where all four of you may have a view on that. But, you know, we're presenting it very much in a positive, which it is a positive, and I know, Fintan, you've touched on, and Kealan have touched on some of the negatives, but just that sense of, as a competitive.
Sure. Yeah, we can start here.
Yeah.
Sure. So every challenge is also an opportunity, and these are very different geopolitical times, even from what it was 5 and 10 years ago. And so I have also this year come into a fellowship called the Carmen Fellowship, and it's a global network of space leaders who have the potential to someday be, you know, senior leadership, heads of agencies. And they select 15 fellows every year to meet in a country around the world and just talk about, you know, sustainability, peace, and cooperation. And you apply both based on your vision for what this could mean and also your history and your track record. So for me, coming into this astronautics role and leading the Flight Opportunities Program, I truly believe in astronautics and human spaceflight as an opportunity to extend diplomatic relations, collaborations, and ties. And so, you know, in North America, certainly, especially in the US and maybe with Canada, China is viewed with some trepidation, and so is collaboration. But from the science side, if you can truly come up with a science project that is of interest to you both, that adheres to the scientific method, why not extend that bridge? Why not build that tie? You know, I have dual ties to India as well as Canada. And 2 years ago, we kicked each other's ambassadors out, which is unfortunate. Because, you know, we're just working to reestablish that relationship now. But however, with my colleagues in the astronautics world, in the space medicine world, all we can do when we're together is talk about, hey, I hope we fly together someday. Because for as much tumultuousness as there is, I think there's also opportunities to build bridges. And even with Saudi Arabia, you know, they get a lot of flack for their historical track record for women's and human rights violations. And, you know, I was in this Carmen Fellowship, I was lucky enough to spend time with the one of the Saudi astronauts who is a woman and also a physician. And it's really, you know, she's very straightforward. We talked about areas of collaboration, areas where, you know, we may have joint values or budding values that are at odds with one another. But we also talked about opportunities to build into the future of human spaceflight together. And, you know, talking about where there might be some criticism, there's also hope. So when you look at her social media bio, it'll say astronaut, physician, and driver, because that historically was not a thing in Saudi Arabia. So where there's challenges, there's also hope.
That's very positive. Thank you. Would anybody else like to comment? Marie, you wanted to come in there? We're coming to a close, so I'll wrap it up maybe after this final.
Thank you very much indeed, Mari Cross. I'm attached to the Institute on the Security and Defence area. Talking of competition, you mentioned, Orla, and a lot about collaboration. And I noticed that the German government yesterday approved what is for them a first space program, and they're putting 35 billion into it. This seems to be a unilateral program. There wasn't any mention of European aspects to it. And I just wonder whether it is possible that states will decide to go it alone in some areas. There's probably mainly a defense aspect to this, but it is a sort of trend that there is a particular program that they're implementing, and it's very specifically a German program.
Okay, thanks, Mary. That's interesting to hear indeed. Now, I'm going to wrap up in the next 3 minutes, so I might just, if anybody wants to add anything to our discussion, and I'm putting you under pressure before I thank all the speakers. Clinton, you look on the edge of your seat there.
I'm always told to say too much, so I'll say nothing. But thank you for the opportunity today.
Kealan.
Yeah, I just think that the idea of opportunities and risk is actually, they're two sides of the same coin. And I think the multinationalism, particularly the EU Copernicus piece, we wouldn't be able to do a rapid flood assessments without the Copernicus models. And there are similar models for defense as well. So that engagement on a multinational level is vital and important.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, obviously our involvement and investment in ESA has been critical, but also I think nationally, you know, where can we go next? There's so much amazing technology and companies here, and where can we really look at other countries like Canada and maybe learn from their translation of space assets and space technology to applications here in Ireland.
And so what I've concluded from this discussion and this panel, there are many differing viewpoints, there's many perspectives, and there's also many thoughts of what the future should look like, both within Ireland, internationally, and who we might engage with. And I think that's excellent, because the best way to go to the future is to create it yourself. So hopefully we've convinced you that there are opportunities out there. There will be threats and risks as well. But then each and every one of you has a role to play in that. So if you feel passionately about this, we want you to go out there and be that change, create those collaborations that you want to see.
Okay, well, I think that's a really nice note to finish on. I think exactly as you say, we've heard fantastic opportunities. I've certainly learned an awful lot that I didn't know about. I'm hoping all of you also did. We all, I think, really benefit from the opportunities. And I'm very struck, even what you had said, Kealan, about disaster recovery, and it's just fascinating to hear what's possible. And again, the resilience and the defence is also equally important. So we have to be alert always to the risks, and that's, I think, something that people in their respective jobs will know that too. But on all our behalves, can I thank in particular our two speakers and our two respondents. I think Shawna and Norah, you're just such a fantastic example, and I think you laid it out exactly there. You're just like role models, and we wish you every success with your future space missions and your future work. And then to thank Kealan and Fintan for your input here today, because again, I think it gave us that hugely rounded discussion. Again, just to thank the Canadian Embassy and the Irish Space Association for supporting this, to thank all of the IIEA team who set it up and prepared for this. And most of all, thank you all very much for your participation. It's been most valued. Thank you.